Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, sponsored by EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, and also sponsored by Natural Awakenings magazine. Live your healthiest life on a healthier planet. Now here's your host, Bernice Butler.
Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today. We are now into our fourth season, and we remain just as excited as ever to help you explore and understand that unbreakable relationship between your health and the health of the planet. Here we look at the hottest topics related to our environment and its sustainability and how they affect your health and wellness. Here we look at issues like climate change, plastic pollution, extreme weather events, and others. And these will meet up with everyday impacts like allergies and asthma, digestive issues and gut health, cancers, lung and heart issues, and more. So listen in today as we talk to some experts for today's show, the first of this month's theme on energy production and consumption. And today we're going to be talking about where are we now on the road to becoming a renewable energy society. Now, we've all heard the latest news on renewable energy and how it can benefit our planet. But where exactly are we when it comes to transitioning toward a fully renewable energy society? Today, we're going to be taking a look at what progress has been made and what steps still need to be taken in order to make sure we develop the sustainable future that we all want. So why should we care about how and when we're transitioning to renewable energy? Well, renewable energies can help reduce carbon emissions that contribute to climate change. Burning fossil fuels such as coal and gasoline emits harmful greenhouse gases into our atmosphere, which of course is a major, if not the major, contributor to global warming and climate change. Renewable energies do not emit such pollutants, and so using them can help slow down climate change by reducing our dependence on fossil fuels. You know, just in the last couple of weeks, most of our country has been experiencing some of the ravages of climate change. That is, in the extreme weather events that we've been experiencing. We've seen the rain and mudslides and what have you in California and the West. And we've seen ice, snow, and cold, we call it here in Texas, Snowmageddon, and across the Midwest as well as the East. In fact, we just saw that the wind chill at the summit of New Hampshire's Mount Washington dropped to minus 108 degrees, marking what our meteorologists and climate scientists say probably is the lowest temperature recorded in the history of the United States. The conversation around transitioning to 100% renewable energy is becoming more mainstream because we can't ignore it. And it's becoming increasingly important to understand the implications of this shift. Renewable energy offers some key benefits to people everywhere in terms of economic, environmental, and mostly health impacts. One of the most immediately apparent benefits of using renewable energy sources like solar and wind is that they produce virtually no pollution. On the other hand, producing electricity from coal or natural gas results in the release of deadly pollutants like nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, smoke, and ash, and it releases all of those into the atmosphere. And these pollutants threaten human health as well as our fragile ecosystems. Renewable energy has been gaining ground as an alternative to traditional sources of energy because it is a cleaner, more sustainable option. But what are the health impacts of switching from fossil fuels to renewable energy? Well, overall, making this switch to renewable energies instead of relying on traditional sources of energy has multiple direct and indirect implications for public health. First, it reduces air pollution as well as the attendant respiratory issues that the air pollution causes. Burning fossil fuel releases harmful pollutants that have wide-reaching effects on human health. The fine particulates, or PM as they call it, released during the burning of fossil fuels pollutes the air we breathe and can cause respiratory issues such as asthma, bronchitis, and even reduce lung function in some people. And so switching to renewables would significantly reduce these hazardous pollutants in the air. It also can reduce water pollution. The gases, chemicals, and other pollutants released into water when burning fossil fuels can harm our aquatic life and create unsafe drinking water supplies. Renewable energies require little or no water to produce electricity, which of course is very, very unlike coal and nuclear power plants, as well as gas. And all of this would help us prevent water pollution from these plants by reducing their use of our waterways for their cooling purposes and some other purposes. It also improves human mental health, which is, in the 3.5 years we've been doing this show, this comes up over and over again. And it probably still surprises me because most people simply do not connect climate change, energy use and consumption, as well as environmental degradation with mental health. However, studies have definitively linked high levels of air pollution to mental health issues like depression and anxiety, especially among urban populations. And so as renewable sources are generally cleaner than fossil fuels, switching away from them could decrease some of those negative mental health impacts by decreasing the toxins in the environment. It also reduces the carbon footprint. Global warming caused by climate change is one of the most pressing environmental issues facing our planet today. And switching away from carbon-based fossil fuels not only helps slow climate change, but also reduces the emissions that contribute to ozone depletion, as well as contributing to the smog formation that we all know about, which deteriorates air and quality even further. It also combats diseases like cancer. Pollutants released during burning coal or natural gas can actually penetrate deep into our cells, causing gene mutations, which ultimately lead to diseases such as cancer or other autoimmune disorders that affect organ functioning. And we've talked about this a lot over the last couple of months of the show as we actually looked at climate change and air and plastic pollution. Now, since renewables generate much fewer pollutants than traditional sources of energy does, switching away from them may help lessen their potential impact on human mortality rates over time due to the improved air quality and reduced emissions that switching to renewables should help us with. And with over 80% of our global electricity being generated from fossil fuels such as coal and natural gas, transitioning to renewable energy makes us less reliant on these dirty fuels. This also reduces our emissions while providing us with a much more secure source of power. Renewable energies ensure secure access to energy. And many countries around the world rely heavily on fossil fuel imports from abroad for their energy production needs, leaving them vulnerable to service disruptions or price fluctuations from foreign suppliers that threaten their security of the access to power at home. And we're also living this today. We're seeing it today with the fallouts from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And in fact, many think that Russia's perception of their region's oil dependence on them is what was going to allow them to successfully invade another sovereign country without impunity. So again, it's more than coming for us. It's here. But by investing in renewable sources of energy, these nations can become self-sufficient when it comes to power generation and guarantee themselves access regardless to what's happening elsewhere in the world. Now, this is a lot, but here today to help us explore and understand this some more are two experts who we hope are going to make us smarter. Today we have with us Tish Tablan, and Tish is a program director for Generation 180, and she leads a national Solar for All Schools campaign. Tish has spent the last 2 decades working with nonprofit, public, and private sectors to implement sustainable solutions. She has consulted localities to improve solar energy policies, and she's worked on national advocacy campaigns that have successfully blocked fracking in public lands and offshore drilling in the Atlantic Ocean. Welcome, Trish. Thank you so much for being with us. And did I get all of that right?
Thanks, Bernice, for having this conversation. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. And our other guest is Noah Long. Noah is director of the Western Region Climate and Clean Energy Program for the Natural Resources Defense Council. And they are good friends of our show, and they probably were some of the first, or if not the second guest on our show when we started broadcasting Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio 3.5 years ago. So we're very excited. And Noah works to advance policies for deploying renewable energy, increasing energy efficiency, and advancing cleaner cars and electric vehicles. His work includes a focus on creating a fast, and I like that, a fast, just, and sustainable transition to clean energy to address the climate crisis in the West, and that's the Western United States. In Noah's first project, with the NRDC, he helped initiate a successful campaign to protect the wildlife, wildlands, and communities of Chile's Patagonia from damages associated with large-scale hydrological development. Welcome, Noah. Thank you for being with us. And did I get all of that right?
You did. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with you, Bernice.
And again, thank you all. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all central markets, sunflower shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, none mercury, and looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lindentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today, to our show on energy production and consumption. And we're focusing on where are we now on our road to becoming a renewable energy society. And we are back with Tish Tablan with Generation 180 and Noah Long with the Natural Resources Defense Council. And again, thank you all for being with us today. I want to start with you now, Tish. If you can explain to our listeners what renewable energy is and what's the difference in the terms clean energy, green energy, and renewable energy, because they're thrown about all the time, and it's my sense that may be confusing to people. But explain that to us, and then also tell us what is the universe, I suppose, of usable renewable energy sources that we know of.
Thanks, Bernice, for that question. I would say that I'm not sure it really matters what term you use. If you like clean energy, green energy, renewable energy, I think those are pretty interchangeable terms. I personally, and in my work, we usually use the term clean energy, primarily because it just emphasizes the health benefits that these sources can provide by creating cleaner air and cleaner water for all of us on the planet. And then it's also opposed to the term dirty energy, which generally implies the burning of fossil fuels, including coal, oil, and natural gas. The universe of those renewable energy or clean energy technologies is growing. And it may surprise you to hear that in the last year, 1/4 of the electricity generated in the United States came from renewable energy sources. Most of that came from solar energy, wind energy, and hydropower, which is typically using water stored behind a dam, such as the Hoover Dam, to push turbines that create electricity. And then other sources of clean energy being used at scale are biomass, which is the burning of natural materials, such as wood or agricultural crops, or geothermal energy, which is capturing heat beneath the surface of the earth.
A couple of things. I just want to emphasize that renewable energy, clean energy, green energy are for the most part synonymous and interchangeable.
I would say so. I'd say the most important thing we're working towards is our carbon-free sources of energy, pollution-free sources of energy that protect the health of our communities.
Indeed, and I tend to think of them as interchangeable and synonymous. But when we're educating the public, which is a big issue in terms of getting people to move towards this and understand it. In 3.5 years of doing this show, I've learned that communications is really important. It seems like a small thing, but it's important. And so that's why I wanted to put a fine tip on the clean, green, and renewable. Yeah, Noah, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I'll just weigh in. I mean, I agree with Tish, although I do think there's some gamesmanship here on the part of the fossil fuel industry. You hear things like clean burning natural gas, or you see efforts in some states to redefine renewable energy to include things like coal waste. And those things are not renewable or clean. And I think when I'm thinking about renewable energy, I think about things that are not depleted by their use, right? We're not going to deplete the sun. We're not going to deplete the wind by using them to produce electricity, whereas we are constantly depleting the available amount of fossil fuels. Now, we need to get off of fossil fuels before we run out of them. They didn't end the Stone Age by running out of rocks, as they say, but we are depleting those resources every time we use them.
Indeed, and I like to put a finer point on something else you mentioned, renewable. If you just think about, you want to define renewable, that's things that renew themselves and will not be depleted. But I just think that's really important because, like you said, I think maybe there's been a deliberate attempt at some levels to obfuscate the term. Now, I want to go back to something that Tish mentioned. We were talking about what are the suspects or the usual sources of renewable energy, and you mentioned biomass. I want to talk about that some more because just on the surface, I think in most people's mind, well, first of all, do they know what we're really talking about when we say biomass? And then when we tell them what it is, it may be confusing because it doesn't initially sound renewable. You want to talk to us about that a little bit more, Tish? Explain to our listeners what is biomass.
Sure. At its simplest definition, biomass is really just burning of any natural, typically plant or animal source material to burn it to create energy. So that can include, as I mentioned before, typically wood, agricultural crops. And to make it sustainable, you really have to pay attention to what is the source of that wood or what are the sources of those resources to make sure we're not cutting down old growth forests in order to burn energy. So I think there's always a need to try to find the most sustainable sources of those resources.
Would a more simple definition perhaps of biomass been burning living things or plant things?
I think that works, yes.
Hopefully they're not still living when you burn them, but yeah, it's plant material that you burn.
And again, I that's our purpose here is Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio is to help people explore and most of all understand. And so we find that works in putting them in some terms that they understand. Now, but burning wood.
I'm sorry, I think Tish really pointed out an important question here, which is that, again, the use of these materials to be renewable needs to not deplete the resource, right? So forest resources are sometimes called renewable, where in fact the forest is being depleted to be burned for energy sources. And you can have a sort of double whammy effect on the environment. First of all, burning them can cause the same air pollution concerns that we have with fossil fuels. And
Indeed.
Second of all, we also can deplete the forests, which have an important carbon sink, in addition to biodiversity and other benefits to the environment, including water and other important needs that we have from forests. So if done wrong, and it often is, unfortunately, biomass can be a pretty dangerous source. On the other hand, there are certainly places like agricultural waste that's currently just rotting away that can be used and deployed to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. Indeed,
and I want to just make just a couple of final points there because, again, for me, it's a head scratcher about biomass because, like you said, it's depleting what are or could be, well, in some cases, trees, valuable resources. And then when you burn it, it's putting pollution in the air just as much as the fossil fuel. But I want to go back. You said what would be some of the better or most used biomass sources? Like you mentioned something about agricultural wastes.
Sure. Yeah. So there's use for biomass for biodiesel, which can be a liquid fuel, or ethanol can be produced from again agricultural waste for replacing gasoline. And both of those sources are sort of on the rise. There's technology in those places. I would say, at a high level, I think they're going to get outcompeted, honestly, by renewable electricity from wind and solar in particular, but also the other sources that Tish mentioned. We're just not seeing the price declines in those places that we are in renewable electricity. And I think those are probably the dominant sources of a sort of full movement towards use of renewables as a keystone towards a sort of electric-dominated, sustainable society. But at the moment, and probably in the future, there's going to be niche needs for things like ethanol from waste agricultural products. I mean, an example is, for example, aviation, right, where it's very hard to electrify. Some of those sources might be quite useful. But the real headline and the real story of renewables, I think, is the wind and the sun, where we're just seeing enormous opportunity and enormous price declines and much quicker deployment than we've ever seen before. We can talk about how we need to speed that up even further, but that's the real headline. Indeed.
And just to end this on biomass, most people are going to come in contact with biomass maybe in their ethanol fuel or something?
Yeah, that's probably the most common. There's a requirement in many parts of the country to increase or to use a certain amount of ethanol as part of gasoline, so you'll see that. It's used in other places as well, but that's probably a common example.
Indeed. And we just have about 3 more minutes to go before we need to go to break. Time is flying. Noah, and so you've mentioned the top forms of renewable energy, solar and wind. Can you maybe give us some stats to give us a picture of, in our energy platforms today, what's a percentage solar, what's a percentage wind, and what's the third one?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, it varies across the country, and those percentages are still, unfortunately, relatively small. As Tish included hydro when she said in the, roughly a quarter of the renewable energy that we're using now is coming from renewables. From just wind and solar, you're looking at, I think, less than 10% from solar and a little bit more than that for wind. But those percentages are increasing very quickly. So while they're still not the dominant sources, they are dominated new generation. So last year and the year before that, and hopefully every year going forward, we're seeing more wind and more solar added to our electric system than anything else.
Indeed. Now, the percentages that you just gave, is that just with our country, or what about worldwide?
Yeah, those are U.S. percentages, but the percentages are similarly small across the world still, unfortunately. Although similarly large in terms of percentage of new generation sources. So we have a relatively small base, but growing really quickly, and so we're on pace if we continue these growth rates to have renewables dominate the electric generation in the coming decades.
Okay. Is there a target time when that is supposed to happen? Are we
from my perspective, I think to address the worst impacts of climate change, we need to have a fully renewable electric system by 2035, and obviously sooner if possible. But that's going to mean even further and even faster increases in renewable energy than we've ever seen before. So it's growing every year, sometimes by 60% or more. But we need to double, maybe even triple that rate of growth to get to a fully renewable electric system. And keep in mind, we don't just need to electrify the things we already plug in, but we need to be plugging in more and more things. And so that's going to grow the system even more.
Indeed. We're going to go ahead and go to break now, and we'll be right back on the other side so that Tish and Noah can make us smarter. Thank you all. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. To today's show on energy production and consumption, focusing on where are we now on our road to becoming a renewable energy society. And we are back with Tish Tablan with Generation 180 and Noah Long with the Natural Resources Defense Council. And again, thank you all for taking time and making time to be with us. Noah, before the break, you were mentioning some statistics in terms of the utilization of wind and solar. So what would be the third behind wind and solar most used or most deployed renewable?
Well, as Tish mentioned, I'd say probably hydroelectric is right up there. Depends on where you are in the planet. Obviously, there's a lot more water in some places than others. But hydro isn't growing very quickly. A lot of the dams of the world are already dammed. A lot of the rivers of the world are already dammed. And in some of those places, those dams are causing pretty significant problems. There are places to increase hydroelectric capacity in agricultural canals or by increasing the efficiency of existing dams, but it's not really a growth source. The one that I'd say is, a greater source of a couple of places where there are greater places for growth opportunity are geothermal electricity, which, as Tish mentioned earlier, is tapping existing heat from underneath the earth, and tidal and offshore wind sources as well. So wind is wind, but offshore wind is a source of new opportunity in recent years.
Indeed. And I just want to dig just a minute into geothermal. How does that occur, and where is it most used? How can people tell that their power is being generated by geothermal sources?
Sure. Well, I think it's pretty hard to tell where your power is generated unless you have it in your backyard or on your roof, right? Some of us have solar on our roofs. But geothermal is produced by the same mechanisms that cause volcanoes and hot springs, right? The core of our planet is extremely hot, and in some places that heat rises to closer to the surface because of the way the tectonic plates are shaped. That technology is advancing to find those places better and at lower cost. And geothermal has really unique advantages compared to other sources because it's not intermittent. It can be produced 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day of the year. Whereas, of course, the wind is sometimes windier and sometimes less windy, and cloud cover can reduce solar electricity. There are ways to address those intermittencies, but geothermal doesn't have that question.
So why is it not used more? Why is it not 10, 20%?
Sure. So geothermal's I'd say the cost reduction in geothermal has been lower than cost reductions in wind and solar, partly because when you manufacture solar, a particular plant might manufacture thousands or even tens of thousands of solar cells every day, and small improvements in figuring out how to do that can lead to huge cost reductions. And that's what's led to the 90+% in cost reductions just in the last couple of decades in solar. Whereas geothermal facilities are more like traditional power plants where you build one big one when you find a good source, and you don't get that same learning through repetition that you get in other sources of renewable energy. That's not to say there aren't improvements. There are, and some of the understanding of tectonic activity and where to drill can really reduce the cost because they don't. If you make mistakes, it can be pretty costly for geothermal.
To be clear, like Old Faithful and all those geysers out in Yellowstone, that's geothermal energy.
That's right.
That's what
just anytime you've been in a hot spring or seen a volcano, that's geothermal energy too. Obviously, we don't tap it in those places. They tap it. It looks like a regular old power plant when you tap it, but it doesn't have any air pollution.
Indeed. So in theory, they'd have to find something that looks like these geysers or the hot springs in Arkansas or in Yellowstone, and then build a power plant on top of that or near that to generate.
Well, you don't have to find surface activity like those geysers. It may not come all the way to the surface, but it needs to be near enough to the surface that you can drill down and get to that heat source. Drilling technology is also improving, so they can drill deeper, but they can also better detect where that subsurface heat is close enough to tap. And I'd say that's where the improvements in geothermal technology are coming.
Yeah, it seems like to me that based upon your explanation that should be or would be a growth area.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And I know that there has to be a lot of research out there. Is there anything else that's being looked at right now that may not be on the radar?
In terms of new renewable electricity, I mean, I mentioned this earlier, and I think probably folks have heard about it, but I think one of the coming revolutions in renewable electricity is going to be offshore wind. Now, we've seen, probably everybody has seen, certainly in your neck of the woods, Bernie's folks in Texas have seen wind turbines. Those wind turbines are getting bigger and more efficient. And as a result, they can produce more power, and they can produce more power more of the time. And the benefits of offshore wind are sort of taking those same advantages and multiplying them. Because when you go offshore, the winds are more constant, And so you can get just more regular and higher levels of power production. Currently, that's more expensive, right? Certainly floating wind turbines in deep water is an expensive technology. But if we're able to break through and figure out how to do that, how to site it in ways that minimizes environmental risk, I think we could see a real revolution in the development in offshore wind, and that could help us address all of the problems you mentioned earlier that we're seeing from fossil fuels now.
So indeed, you think the major barrier for that is cost and environmental degradation?
Well, I'd say the major barrier is cost.
Okay.
Look, all sources of energy have some environmental impacts. There's nothing you can do without some environmental impact.
But not compared to fossil fuel.
Not compared to fossil fuel. That's right. You're not cooking the planet.
I got you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that explanation, Noah. Tish, I want to come back to you. Now, I know that your work now and in the past has focused around solar. So why solar? And are there certain sectors of our economy or of our world that have better feasibility for specific types of renewable technologies, or should I say for solar?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Bernice. I have been focusing on solar because I'm personally excited about the potential for this technology. Unlike some of the things Noah's been talking about where the technology is newer, like offshore wind, or we haven't overcome these challenges, we know how to deploy solar. The costs have been falling, and it is now one of the lowest cost forms of electricity really around the world right now. So much so that the U.S. Energy Information Administration has studied, what new power plants we're building over the next year, and they anticipate that over half of that domestic energy, that new domestic energy we'll be producing will be solar energy, because it is now cheaper to build a new solar plant than it is to continue operating old coal-fired power plants. It's kind of incredible to think about that we can produce new clean energy cheaper than keeping these old fossil fuel burning plants open.
That's exciting, because I think, as perhaps Noah alluded to in our last segment, there is a industry and a sector to whose benefit it is to point out perhaps the negatives, the barriers, and the inhibitions. And I remember, because I also published a Green and Healthy Living magazine, and I started that about 12 years ago, and there was just so much negativity, and it was always on the cost. That's the first thing we can't do that because of the cost, and you never got to the rest of the conversation. And so I'm very excited about that cost. Noah, you wanted to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I just don't think you can emphasize this point enough, and I really appreciate Tish bringing it up. The costs of renewable electricity are now the lowest of any generation source. So much so, and I'm just going to say this again, Tish, if you don't mind, so much so that building new wind and solar is cheaper than operating existing coal-burning power plants. That means we should be closing all of those coal power plants today. And the only reason we aren't is because the incumbent folks that own those power plants continue to profit from their operation, even though they're charging you more to use them than it would cost to replace them with renewable electricity. That's like if the phone company got to decide whether you had a landline or a cell phone because they profited more from the landline. That makes no sense, and we've got to demand that our electric utilities make that transition quickly, effectively, and in a way that transitions the communities around the country from one source to the other in a just way.
Indeed, and that takes educating and our citizens, our society really knowing what's going on, and that's our purpose with Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, is to break this out, explain it in a way that people really do understand, so that they can indeed push for these things. Are there any smart companies out there? And we just have a couple of minutes to go, so we'll start this. Any smart companies out there that realize they're in energy production and not coal-fired or fossil fuel-fired power plants?
Absolutely, there are, and I'm glad you asked that. A number of electricity companies around the country. In fact, most people now live in the service territory of an electric company that is committed to go to 100% clean energy. Now, most of those timelines need to speed up by a decade or two, but most of the utility industry has recognized that this is a transition that needs to happen. And it's really just a question of pace. And so, I live in New Mexico, and I litigated a case last year in Colorado where we ultimately came to a settlement agreement with Xcel Energy the largest utility in Colorado, to close all of their coal, including a coal plant that was built just about 10 years ago, one of the last coal plants built in the western United States. They're going to close that coal plant before 2030, and they're going to get 90% emissions reductions across their system by 2030. So that's the kind of pace of change that we need to see.
Amazing. We're going to go to break, but when we come back from break, I just want to talk with you. I want to ask you one more thing about that particular issue you were talking about, because that's amazing, and I'd like to see everybody do that. We'll be right back on the other side with Tish Tablan with Generation 180 and Noah Long with the Natural Resources Defense Council. Thank you all. We'll be right back. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Central Markets, Sunflower Shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, none mercury, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lindentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today, to our show on energy production and consumption, focusing on where are we now on the road to becoming a renewable energy society. And we are back with Tish Tablan and Noah Long, and they are making us smarter. So I want to go back just for a minute, Noah. You were telling us about some litigation that you were involved in with the major energy company in Colorado, and you were able to get them to basically, I think you said, close down the coal plant and switch to a renewable energy plant?
That's right. Yeah, that plan is still being finalized. The specific resources that will be brought online, it's in the phase, what they call the phase 2 of this resource planning docket. But in the initial phase, which was decided last year, the company agreed, and most major stakeholders and the commission ultimately blessed the decision to close all of their coal plants in Colorado, including one that was just built 10 years ago, one of the last coal plants built in the United States. Or in the western United States, and get 90+% emissions reductions by 2030, adding thousands and thousands of megawatts. Now, that's a wonky term, but think lots and lots and lots of wind and solar to replace all of that coal over that same time period.
What made that happen?
I think it's a combination of factors. It's the people in Colorado have elected leaders that understand that this is a transition that can happen, that's cost-effective, and that benefits customers and the environment. And I think the utility company is recognizing that this transition is one that they can manage and one that they can continue to survive and operate in. And so that combination led to a negotiation and ultimately a settlement to get that kind of transition on the scale and pace that we need.
And I think that I wish that information were out there more and lots more people knew about that and talked about it, because it's like the people being educated, knowing what's going on, really seem to have driven that a lot. And Colorado really is known as one of those green places, Colorado, Oregon, and then you go to, some place like in Texas, it's Austin, and you've got various places. And that's driven by the people who care enough about the environment to hold the people, the government, and the businesses' feet to the fire in terms of contributing to our sustainable future, at least not harming it.
That's right. And I would say Colorado is known for that now, but just a few years ago, Colorado was, filled with coal plants and moving pretty slowly. So I think people can make a difference by recognizing this opportunity and getting out and demanding change of their policymakers and voting. Of course, there's things we can do at home too, right? Mm-hmm. By ensuring that we're using energy efficient appliances and putting solar on our roofs if we can. But I think understanding the issues and demanding change of our policymakers is the most important thing we can do to address climate change.
Indeed, and that really does start with understanding the issues. Now, I want to go back to
Yep.
Trish for a moment, and we talked a lot, both you and Noah, about the fact that renewable energy from the power provision standpoint can be provided now equal to or less than fossil fuel generation. But what are the economics of transitioning to renewable energy for, say, like a typical or average household? And then what are some examples? I'm sure there are some around the country, around the world, maybe, where households are using 100% renewable energy, and businesses as well.
I think the first thing you can do is take a look at what is the electricity mix in your own utility. So you might want to start there and understand, what is my utility doing? And it's going to build on what Noah said. You can be a voice for changing that. So you can advocate for that directly to your utility, or even at the state level. There are states that require the utilities to transition to 100% clean energy. So that term is often the Clean Energy Standard or Renewable Portfolio Standard. In my home state of Virginia, we became the first state in the South that will require our major utilities to transition to carbon-free sources of electricity by 2050. So it can be done by being a voice and advocating for better policies. So that's kind of one step, is understanding what it is you're getting. And then the second step also is, let's think about what you can do in your own home. If you haven't educated yourself about the recently passed Inflation Reduction Act, this bill is filled with opportunities for homeowners, businesses, and communities to transition to clean energy more affordably. So there is a group called Rewiring America that has made it easy for people to enter in your address and understand what tax credits or rebates are available. And they estimate that the average household could save $1,800 per year on their electricity bills if you do things like install an electric heat pump for your heating and cooling or for your water heating, get an electric vehicle, and use solar energy. So there is now a 30% tax credit for homeowners if you purchase solar energy, battery storage, or geothermal heating installation for your house.
Indeed. And I am it's a head scratcher to me, but I realize that this is what I do every day. But it's a head scratcher to me that there's not a lot more marketing or awareness of this out there.
Yeah, that's really what my organization, Generation 180, is about, trying to help everyday people understand their role and how we can transition together towards a renewable energy society. So that's a lot of what we're working on, is reaching out to folks to help them understand that. So some of the things we're doing is educating people on electric vehicles and how you can access that today. What are the benefits of doing that today? We talk about residential solar. I particularly work on helping school communities go solar and what benefits those will have for students, the schools, and the community members. So there are lots of opportunities, and there are a lot of great groups, including Noah's organization, NRDC, has been doing so much great work over decades. Look for a group in your community. It is not hard to find.
And that's true, but I think we might need to push it a little bit more for the groups finding the people. I want to put something out there to both of you all, because we probably only got about 5 minutes to go. And I'll start with you, Noah, first on this. What have you seen to be some of the most hot button issues or responsive issues that drive people toward renewable energy, or that perhaps make them back away or be fearful?
That's a great question. And, I think the work that Tish is describing, that's sort of at the community level, is so important, because I'd say most folks don't think a lot about where their electricity is coming from, right? They plug it into the wall. They want it to be affordable. They want it to be cheap. And I think there is a sea change, an opportunity here for folks to think more about that and think about their opportunities, both for saving money, but also for being part of a healthier society. And I think that comes from being able to see those opportunities firsthand. So when you're seeing solar on schools' roofs and you're seeing solar in your community, you start to see that this is a change that you can be a part of. And it's not that we're going to address all of these problems by, solar panels on rooftops. This is a global system that we have to change. But by being able to see it and by being able to understand how tangible those changes can be, I think we do begin to engage and understand the part we can play. And I also just want to emphasize another point that Tish brought up earlier, which is that renewables really are sort of keystone in this ecosystem of clean energy technologies, and the prices are falling in all of them, whether it's battery technologies for vehicles, heat pumps to heat water and space or buildings, LEDs that can light places much more efficiently, literally using less than 1/10 of the power of regular old incandescent bulbs. All of these technologies are coming together that can help us to completely eliminate the role of fossil fuels in our lives, and the prices of all of them are coming down, and the government, the federal government, thank goodness, has finally put its thumb on the scales and made all of them even cheaper through incentives in this past year. So there's a huge sea change that can happen here if we engage in it. And it's going to take, like you said, Bernice, it's going to take industry folks, installers, construction companies also understanding these opportunities and helping homeowners to make those changes as well.
Indeed. And we just have 2 minutes to go, and I want both of you all to kind of weigh in on our last question. And it's, how do you think, what do we need to do, what needs to happen for us to achieve the exponential growth in our adoption of renewable energies, and what's that going to look like? Let me go to Tish first, and then we'll end with Noah.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is everyday people need to understand what their role is, and that this is something we can do and we can do together. So like I said, Generation 180 is really working to help people understand what they can do today. And I think it's most important to look at what you can do in your own home. Can I go solar? Can I get an electric vehicle? It's time to replace my furnace. Can I get an electric heat pump instead? So really look at what role you can do in your own home. And then what can I do in my greater community? So these changes don't happen on their own. They really do, as Noah said, rely on individual voices speaking to their utilities, speaking to their local governments and their state legislators. So we got to all do this together.
Indeed. Thank you, Tish. Noah, last word.
I think Tish said that so well. I mean, thank goodness the prices have come down. These are now the cheapest sources of energy, and we can save money by using them instead of dirty fossil fuels. So that is a challenge that we had 10 and 15 and 20 years ago that looked almost insurmountable, and now we've passed it. So it's just a question of not can we do it, but will we do it, and when will we do it? And the time is now. So we've got to make those changes ourselves, and we've got to demand those changes of our policymakers.
Indeed.
We can't have the profits of the few from fossil fuels overcome the interests of the many. We've got to stand up together and get this change done.
Indeed. And my last one sentence is that people need to, I think people are motivated by what's in it for me. And as I like to say, what's in it for you is your health, your life.
That's
good
right.
health.
Absolutely.
And that's why I took the time at our beginning of our intro to really run down some of the health impacts. People don't realize this. They know things are happening. They know there's more instances of cancer and autoimmune and things like that. Where's it coming from? So all of that is to be thought about and talked about more and more. Noah and Tish, we greatly appreciate you being with us today. We've been with Noah Long with the Natural Resources Defense Council, and we've been with Tish Tablan with Generation 180. And they really have made us smarter on this very, very important and critical subject to all of us. Thank you all. And thank you, listeners, for listening today to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. The conversation starts here, but our goal is for it to continue in your home, in your social circle, in your workplaces, at the water cooler, in the grocery checkout line, and I thought about another place today, and that's around your kitchen table. And this is so that we can all work together to realize that healthy living is simply not possible without a healthy planet. Our culture is a result of 1 trillion tiny acts taken by billions of people every day like ourselves. And each of them can seem insignificant, but all of them add up, one way or the other, to the change that we each live through. This is your host, Bernice Butler. Thank you for listening in today, and join us again next week for more on energy production and consumption. And please listen to any of our past shows on podcast wherever you get yours. Thank you.